Welcome to the tutorial for the Hazel pen. Let's get started. There are two ways to make the neckties for the Hazel dress or blouse, but I'm going to show you the Rulo method in this video tutorial. Starting with your pre-cut necktie piece, fold it in half and sew along the edge, as you can see here. It's about 0.5 centimeters in from the folded edge. Make sure if you can to cut this panel on the bias, because when you're actually pulling it back through itself, it's going to stretch open a lot easier if it is on a bias grain. Once you've done that for both neckties, you just want to go very close to your sewing line and just slowly trim the excess off. This is all going to get folded inside the Rulo necktie. And this is your loop turner. Now these are the handiest little things. All it is a little hook and latch on the end and a ring puller on the other side. So what you want to do is you want to slide it into the channel very slowly. The latch will go back on itself, and once you get to the end, you want the latch to pierce through the fabric and then the hook to get through the end of the other fabric, and you very slowly have to pull it through the channel. This is quite a fiddly exercise, but once you get the hang of it, it's really handy. And I think the effect of Rulo neckties as opposed to folding the panel in on itself and top stitching over the top, it looks a lot more professional. So even though it is really fiddly, it's something good to try, and you can get quite thin spaghetti straps or Rulo straps. My one piece of advice is to take it very, very slow and just do it centimetre by centimetre. Don't try doing it all at once and then trying to yank it through, because you'll break the threads and then you'll have to start again. So just take your time and you'll get a nice effect on the other end. It'll be nice and thin and will look like a little piece of spaghetti. Just go ahead and do it for the other side. Now once you've completed both, you just want to finish off the edge that's going to be showing and not sewn into the seam. So what you do is you get to the end with your sewing needle and you just push the raw threads, the raw edge in on itself with the tip of your needle. Then all you need to do is have your matching thread and hand sew it in on itself. Another option when you finish that is you can tie a little knot or something right at the end, or put a little bead and then a knot just as decoration. And there you have it. That's how you make Rulo neckties. Now because your yoke is all fully lined, you're going to need your main outer fabric and your inner lining fabric. For me, they're both the same, but you might have a thinner lining fabric just to reduce bulk. And just start by matching your front and back pieces and pinning and sewing all along the shoulder seam. Now because your shoulder seams are curved on this pattern, what you're going to need to do is actually notch along the seam, which notch just means to cut along the seam, not touching the actual seam line. And the purpose for this is when you actually go to turn everything inside out and press the seam, this helps with creating a really nice curve without the fabric bubbling in on itself. And now it's time to press your shoulder seams open. So what you want to do is just slowly use the nose of your iron and open up the seam, just slowly pressing it. Now you can see here with the overlap, that's why we do the notches. It just allows for your seam to sit really nicely and to have a really nice curve. I'd also suggest pressing your seam halfway, one from the edge of your shoulder, and then spinning it around and pressing it the other half of the way from your neckline edge. That way you're not going to crease the fabric in on itself. So So you'll need to do that for both your outer fabric and your lining fabric. Now we'll be attaching your lining to your main fabric, but what we want to do is capture the Rulo neckties within that seam. So go ahead and place your Rulo neckties where they need to be and just pin them right on the top edge corner of your neck opening. This is with right sides facing up for your outer fabric. Now this is your lining fabric, as you can see, because the raw edges are facing out. What we need to do is match up the shoulder seams and just put a pin in there. And match them up on the other side and put a pin in there as well. Now where you've pinned your Rulo neckties on the top corner edge, just take that pin out, put it on a horizontal angle, put your lining over the top and reattach your pin through the Rulo necktie through both layers of fabric. And from that point, just continue to pin all the way around the neckline. Now you can go ahead and sew all around your neckline. At the point where your Rulo neckties are, right at the center front, you need to come all the way to your center front, just in your seam allowance, pivot, take your pin out from where your Rulo necktie is, and you want to back tack over your Rulo necktie just to make sure it's extra secure, because this is going to be a point of stress on your garment because you're kind of going to be pulling on it to tie it up. Once you've back tacked over it a couple of times, come down to the apex, pivot again, so you get a nice point. You can back tack at this edge as well, and then just slowly come back up. And once you reach your Rulo necktie on the other side, you want to do another couple of back tacks to make it extra secure. Then when you're at the top of your Rulo necktie, as you can see here, you just want to pivot your garment again, making sure not to capture any of the excess Rulo necktie, and go back around to where you started and back tack. Now you can pull your Rulo necktie back out and just check that it's on the right angle. Now because you've got all of this excess fabric right at the corner, what we need to do is actually notch all around these curves so that when you fold them through, they're going to be nice and flat. So right at the apex, you want to create a little notch and all around the keyhole opening. Now, when you actually get to where your Rulo loops are, this corner, you just want to cut off that entire corner, obviously leaving a couple of millimeters where the seam line is, and just go ahead and do it on the other side as well. Now the secret to getting a really sharp edge is folding the fabric in on itself, doubling it over at the corner, and then kind of with your fingers, kind of using the heat of your hands and fingers to kind of press that sharp corner and maneuver the fabric so it is sitting nice and flat. So you fold the inside part and the top neck edge, hold those pieces together and flip it through so you know the fabric is sitting flat. Now to make this edge super sharp and sitting really nicely against the body, we're going to be doing an edge stitch. This means opening out your panels, having your lining on one side and the main fabric on the other side, folding your seam allowance towards your lining and stitching 1 to 2 millimeters from your seam line. The only difficult point with doing this is where your Rulo neckties are. So that corner right there, what you're going to have to do is sew as far up as you can to that corner, which is usually stopping about 2 to 3 centimeters away from the corner, lifting your sewing foot up and taking the needle out, and then pivoting around to start on the other edge of the corner, putting your needle back in and your foot back down and continuing sewing along. once you've finished doing this, when you take your pieces out, you just want to go up to where the corner is, trim those threads right to the fabric. And then what you want to do is turn it inside out, and remember to trim that thread on the inside as well. And now you've completed edge stitching your lining. So this is my favorite part. Once you actually have finished doing that, you can have the lining facing up and press it, and you can see here, it makes such a difference to the neckline edge. It makes it look nice and sharp and really professional. And you've got that nice little edge stitch on the inside, a little bit of a roll, and it just makes all your curves look really, really crisp. Now we're just going to stay stitch the raw edge of the yoke. We're going to be matching it up at the shoulder seam, the center front and the center back. What this just does is make sure that everything is just staying nice and secure all together. Nothing is stretching, nothing is moving. So when we come to sew our bodice panel onto there, everything is all matching up. Then you can go ahead and overlock it. Now we're going to start making the sleeves. What we want to do is just sew the underarm seam on the sleeve, and you just want to press that seam open, nice and flat, ready to go. Now, to create the actual elastic casing, you want to double roll the sleeve hem, like here. Start with the back tack. I like to do this at the actual seam. And continue to sew around your fabric, leaving about a 10 to 15 centimeter gap between where you started and where you're finishing now, because what we're going to be doing is inserting an elastic in this channel. Now you just need a bit of elastic. You can just measure it around your arm like this, making sure it's not too tight but it's also not too loose, and making sure to add 2 centimeters for seam allowance. Now grab your loop turner again. We're going to be using this to slowly push through the channel that you've created and out the other end, and then we can grab our elastic that we've pre-measured and added a bit of seam allowance on, hook it onto the end hook and start sliding it through the channel. But before you do that, make sure to get the other edge of your elastic and just pin it to the edge of your sleeve. That way we're not going to lose it. And slowly just pull it back through the channel you've created. Once you're at the other end, just unlatch it from the hook, get your other end of the elastic, and we're going to be attaching these. So just overlap where you're going to sew the elastic, reuse that pin just to pin it together. And you can pull your elastic out of the channel just to make sure you've got enough to easily stitch it together in your sewing machine. And just sew a couple of back tacks across that to make sure it's extra secure. Now you can go back and pick up where you left off on sewing your channel. Just make sure that your elastic is folded in and you're continuing to double roll the same amount of fabric on your hem. Just put your needle in and back tack at the start. What you want to do is make sure that you're rolling that fabric in. You can stretch your elastic, make sure it's under it really well so you're not actually sewing over your elastic, and just continue sewing along that seam line until you get back to where you started. Just create a back tack and you're done. Just make sure to trim your threads there and also stretch out your elastic a little bit so you can make sure that the gathering is evenly dispersed around the cuff. And now you can go ahead and do the same process for your other sleeve. Now on the top edge of your sleeve, create a little bit of gathering with a large stitch length and open ends on both sides. I like to do double rows of gathering stitching because it just makes it a lot easier to sew and the gathering is a lot more even. And you can gather from either side of your open threads. And then you should have just a nice amount of gathering at the top. We will come to actually finalize this once we attach the sleeve and the bodice to the yoke. So now you've completed probably the hardest parts of the dress, which are the yoke and the sleeves. Now what we need to do is create the other panels. I've got the first bodice panel and I'm just sewing it along the side seams on either side, as well as creating some gathering along the top edge. This will be sewn into the yoke. So do the same process and create 2 lines of gathering stitches, which is just long stitches of like a number 5, leaving thread tails on either end so you can easily gather it from either side. And once you've done that on the front and back panels, now we're going to be matching up and attaching the sleeve and the actual bodices together. So make sure to match up the side seam with the underarm seam of your sleeve. Just pin at this point and then pin all around the front armhole and around the back armhole. And then just sew the seam together. And now you've attached your sleeve to your bodice. And now you can go ahead and do that on the other side. And this is what it should look like. You've got both your sleeves and your front and back bodice, and now we're going to attach the yoke to your bodice. So what we need to do is match it at the center front, at the center back, and then match your notches to your front and back armhole seams, as you can see here. Once you've done that, then you can actually see if you need to add more gathering or release gathering, or even just evenly disperse it along this edge before you actually go ahead and pin it. So once you evenly disperse a gathering in between all of your pins, you can just pin down those areas and then you're good to go. And now you can sew all along that seam. Just remember, as you're sewing, you can still make small adjustments to your gathering as you go. Now you may find as you fold your garment right side out that you have a couple of excess threads or showing gathering threads. You can just go through and snip these off, and this is what it should look like once you've attached it all. You can overlock that seam too once you've finished sewing it together. Now we're going to actually attach your pockets to your second tier, and just match up your pocket bag with the notches on your pattern and just pin it at both the top and the bottom. Now once you've done that, you can go ahead and sew all along and attach the pocket bag to the side seam. Do this for both sides of your front panel and both sides of your back panel. Now you can fold your pocket bag back over, and we're just going to edge stitch about 1 to 2 millimeters from the edge. This is just going to help your pocket bag sit really flat and not have it gaping open when you're actually wearing the dress. So you can also press this, leaving that little bit of millimeter edge of the fold over to make it nice and crisp. Once you've done that for your front and back panels, you're just going to want to match up your pocket bags, right sides facing together. Pin right at the top where the pocket bag edges meet. Pin all around the edge of your pocket bag and secure at the side seams as well. Once you've done that, you can just start at the top edge, making sure to back tack, and then sew all the way down, pivot. Once you're 1 centimeter in from the pocket bag edge, just pivot your fabric like this, and you can sew all around the pocket bag. Get to the edge again, pivot, and then you can sew all the way back down your side seam. And once you turn that right side out, you can see just how crisp that pocket bag is because you've done the edge stitching and you've pressed it. It's going to sit really nicely against your body when you're wearing it. And now I'll be adding the gathering stitches onto my second and third tier panels. And just remember, as we did before, doing 2 stitching lines of large stitch lengths, preferably number 5, and leaving the thread tails open at either end. Now once you've done that for the second and the third tier, just take your time pulling in the gathering threads and creating the gathering all along this edge. Now we're going to be attaching the second tier to your bodice panel. And with your bodice facing right side out and your second tier panel facing wrong side out, we're going to be attaching it along the side seams and the center front and center back seams. Once you've pinned it at the side seams and the center front and center back seams, you can take your time just adjusting the gathering stitch, whether it's tightening it and adding more gathering or loosening it and dispersing it out a bit more. Once you've taken your time evenly dispersing all of your gathering, you can sew it up. And now you can do the same process for your third and final tier, just matching it up at your side seams, center front, center back seam, pinning those areas, then gathering in or loosening out to make sure it perfectly fits together. Then you can go ahead and sew that final seam together and overlock it. And now it's time for your final step. All you need to do is double roll your hem 1 centimeter and then another centimeter and just keep going until you've reached the end. And you've made it, your very first Hazel dress or blouse. Make sure to tag me on Instagram in any of your creations, as I'd love to see how you've made your Hazel.